the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
All right, so let's get right into it today. We're going to take a deep dive into this political showdown that's been making headlines.
Yeah.
It's the clash between Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, her as AOC,
Right.
and Senator John Fetterman.
Yeah.
And it's all over this recent government funding battle and the threat of a government shutdown.
A lot of drama.
Yeah, a lot of drama. And the source that we're going to be using to look at this is an article from RedState,
Okay.
which is a conservative news and opinion website. So just keep that in mind as we kind of unpack this.
Good point.
You ready to go deep?
I am ready. Let's do it. This is not just your average political back and forth here. This actually exposes some pretty serious divisions
Oh, yeah.
within the Democratic Party.
Yeah. And for context, for those of you who haven't been glued to C-SPAN lately, the House GOP had passed this continuing resolution,
Right.
or CR, to keep the government funded and avoid a shutdown. But it needed the Senate's approval, which, as you know, is controlled by the Democrats. And that's where things got really interesting.
It always does.
Right? AOC came out swinging against the CR, arguing that it was a betrayal of House Democrats.
Yeah, and, her argument actually reflects a growing tension that's been kind of simmering within the Democratic Party for a long time.
Sure.
For decades, really. You have the more progressive wing, often associated with figures like AOC, and then you have the more moderate establishment wing.
Right. And it's kind of been this push and pull.
Always.
And she didn't hold back either.
No, she did not.
She said, and I'm quoting here, "I think there is a deep sense of outrage and betrayal. And this is not just about progressive Democrats. It's across the board, the entire party."
So it's a big deal to her.
Yeah, huge. And her opposition to the CR, it was rooted in some pretty specific concerns.
Yeah.
She felt that it didn't adequately address some key progressive priorities. And she saw it as kind of a capitulation to Republican demands.
It's like they weren't fighting hard enough from her perspective.
Exactly. And so she's essentially arguing that Democrats, they shouldn't compromise on their core principles, even if it means a government shutdown. But how realistic is that approach, especially when the stakes are so high?
Well, that's the heart of the debate, isn't it? And I think to really get AOC's position, you have to look at this ideological divide within the Democratic Party and how it's played out throughout history.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the clashes between progressives and establishment Democrats during the New Deal era or the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, these tensions, they go way back.
Yeah, it's like this recurring theme in American politics.
Always this struggle between idealism and pragmatism.
Exactly. And in this case, the threat of a government shutdown just adds another layer of complexity to it.
Oh, for sure.
And to make matters even more intense, you had some House Democrats actually threatening to primary Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, for supporting the CR.
Wow. Yeah, that's serious business.
That's not messing around.
Absolutely. And, that threat, it just highlights how deep these divisions run within the party. But then on the other side of this whole debate, you have Fetterman, who also voted for the CR, and his response to AOC's outrage was, well, let's just say he was a bit more blunt.
Blunt is an understatement, I think. When asked about AOC's comments, he told The Hill, "I hope you can relay how little I care about her views on this."
Okay, so he didn't mince words.
No, he did not.
But, his response, while maybe lacking some diplomatic finesse, does reflect the perspective of many Democrats who prioritize avoiding a government shutdown and its very real consequences over ideological purity.
Right, because a shutdown would have a ripple effect.
Huge ripple effect.
Across the country, it would impact everything.
Yeah.
Federal services to the economy.
You name it.
Yeah, and so it raises some really interesting questions. Is Fetterman's approach more pragmatic and ultimately more beneficial to the people that he represents?
Yeah.
Or is AOC right to hold the line on principle, even if it means risking a shutdown?
Tough questions.
Yeah, really tough questions, and ones that don't have easy answers, and they get to the core of what it means to govern effectively in a democracy. And Fetterman didn't stop there. He went on to challenge AOC directly, asking, what's the exit plan once we shut the government down? What about all the millions of Americans who are going to have their lives damaged?
He's not holding back.
No, he's not. And, he's raising a crucial point about the real-world impact of these political decisions.
For sure.
And as Fetterman pointedly highlighted, What about the ones that won't have any paycheck? She'll have her paycheck, though.
Ooh,
That's a pretty loaded statement.
it is.
And it gets to the heart of this class divide that often underlies these political debates.
You know what he's doing there? He's essentially accusing AOC of being out of touch
Yeah.
with the struggles of everyday Americans who would bear the brunt of a shutdown while members of Congress would continue to receive their salaries.
And that argument resonates with a lot of voters.
It does.
But is it fair to say that AOC is simply ignoring the needs of her constituents? Or is there a deeper principle at play here?
It's a good question to consider, and to answer that, I think we need to dig a little deeper into AOC's perspective and the rationale behind her opposition to this CR.
Yeah, what were her specific concerns? What alternatives was she proposing?
Right, because we can't just dismiss her position as ideological grandstanding without understanding the nuances of her argument, and that's where I think our RedState source comes in.
Okay.
They offer a pretty scathing analysis of this whole situation.
Yeah, they do. They argue that this clash is a microcosm of a much larger problem within the Democratic Party.
Exactly.
They claim that Democrats have become so focused on opposing Trump and performing for the progressive base that they've lost sight of the needs of everyday Americans.
Yeah, they're saying they've lost touch with the average voter.
Okay, so that's a pretty bold claim. What evidence do they provide to support that argument, and how does this specific clash between AOC and Fetterman fit into that larger narrative?
That's what we're going to unpack next. We're going to delve deeper into this RedState article, analyze their claims, and explore how this debate fits into the broader political landscape. Buckle up, because things are about to get really interesting.
I am all ears. Stay with us as we continue this deep dive into the heart of this political showdown.
You know, this RedState article, they don't really hold back. They call this clash a Dem Civil War.
Wow.
Which I think might be a little dramatic, you know?
Yeah, a little bit.
But they're definitely using it to underscore how seriously they're taking this divide within the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating is they argue this isn't just about AOC and Fetterman. This is a symptom of a much bigger issue.
Well, absolutely.
For the Democratic Party as a whole.
Yeah. Their central argument is that the Democrats are so fixated on opposing Trump and catering to the progressive base that they've lost touch with the needs of the average American.
Right.
They're claiming this focus on ideological purity over pragmatic solutions, that it's actually hurting the very people they claim to represent.
Yeah. And that's a pretty harsh assessment.
Yeah.
Do they provide any specific examples to support this claim, or is it more of a general critique of where the Democratic Party is headed?
Well, they point to a number of recent examples, including the push for Medicare for all, the Green New Deal defunding the police.
Right.
And they argue that these policies, while popular with the progressive base, they're just too radical for moderate voters.
Yeah.
And ultimately alienate the very people Democrats need to win elections.
Right. And I think it's worth noting that many Democrats would say those policies are exactly what's needed to address the very real and pressing issues facing the country, like climate change, income inequality, and racial injustice.
Absolutely. And that's the crux of this whole debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it more important to stick to your principles and fight for what you believe in, even if it means losing elections? Or is it better to compromise and make incremental progress where possible?
Yeah, it's like choosing your battles, right?
Exactly.
And it reminds me of something we were talking about earlier about this historical tension between progressives and moderates within the Democratic Party. And it feels like this clash between AOC and Fetterman is just the latest chapter in this long-running saga.
You're exactly right. And, you know, this RedState article, they're essentially arguing that this tension has reached a boiling point and that it could actually lead to a fracturing of the Democratic Party if it's not addressed.
Oh, wow. So they're saying this could be like a major breaking point.
Yeah, they're not holding back.
But let's be honest here. There's a similar dynamic playing out within the Republican Party as well.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the rise of Trump and the MAGA movement, it's created this really deep rift between the traditional conservative wing and the more populist nationalist wing of the party.
Right. It's like these parallel struggles are happening.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to see how these internal struggles within both parties are playing out against the backdrop of this increasingly polarized political landscape. It's like we're witnessing a realignment of political ideologies in real time.
It's a really interesting time to be following politics, that's for sure.
For sure. And this clash between AOC and Fetterman, it's also highlighted the growing influence of social media in shaping political discourse. You know, AOC is really good at using platforms like Twitter.
Oh, yeah, she's a pro.
To amplify her message and get her supporters mobilized.
Right, and that's another point that RedState brings up. They argue that this reliance on social media has created this echo chamber where politicians are rewarded for performing for their base and engaging in this outrage culture instead of focusing on finding common ground and actually solving problems.
Yeah, it's like they're playing to their online audiences instead
Yeah.
of governing for the whole country. But is it really fair to blame social media for this polarization, or is it just reflecting these deeper societal divisions that were already there?
That's a tough question. I think that's something for sociologists and political scientists to debate, but there's no denying that social media has played a role in amplifying those divisions and making it harder to have those constructive conversations across ideological lines.
Right, because everyone's just retreating to their own corners.
Exactly.
So we've got these internal struggles within both parties, a deeply polarized political landscape,
Yeah.
the amplifying effect of social media. It's a pretty volatile mix, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And this clash between AOC and Fetterman, it's like a microcosm of all these forces at play.
It's like a perfect storm.
Yeah. And, it's a reminder that American politics is in a constant state of change.
Right.
And it's really unclear what the future holds.
So we've talked a lot about the red state perspective on all of this.
Right.
But what about AOC's side of the story?
Yeah.
They claim that she's out of touch and prioritizing purity over progress.
Right.
But what are her arguments for opposing this CR?
Well, one of her main concerns was that the CR didn't include enough funding for key progressive priorities like affordable housing, healthcare, and education.
So she's essentially arguing that the Democrats are giving up too much ground to the Republicans and not fighting hard enough for the needs of working class Americans.
Exactly. And she's not alone in this view.
Right.
A lot of progressives argue that the Democrats need to be bolder in their policy proposals and more willing to stand up to Republican obstructionism.
Right. But then the question becomes, how do you do that effectively without alienating those moderate voters and risking losing elections?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, and it's one that the Democratic Party is going to have to grapple with as it heads into this next election cycle.
It's a tough balancing act for sure.
It is.
And so where does Fetterman's critique about AOC's secure paycheck fit into this larger debate? Is he simply trying to score some political points, or is he raising a legitimate concern about this disconnect between politicians and the people they represent?
I think there's some truth to both sides of that argument. On the one hand, Fetterman's comment could be seen as just a way of dismissing AOC's concerns and painting her as out of touch with the struggles of everyday Americans.
Right.
But on the other hand, it does raise a valid point about the need for politicians to be mindful of the real-world consequences of their actions and avoid making decisions that would disproportionately harm those who are most vulnerable.
Right, because the people who are already struggling are the ones who are going to feel it the most.
Exactly.
And it taps into this broader frustration that I think a lot of people feel about the political class. This sense that politicians were more interested in scoring points and advancing their own careers than actually serving the needs of their constituents.
Yeah, I can see that.
Which brings us back to that question that RedState posed. Are the Democrats so focused on opposing Trump and appealing to their base that they've lost sight of what it means to effectively govern?
It's a really thought-provoking question, and one that I'm sure we'll continue to debate as we head into the next election cycle.
And it's a question that has implications beyond just this one political party.
Oh, for sure.
It challenges us to think about what we want from our leaders and how we can hold them accountable for their actions.
It also encourages us to reflect on our own roles as citizens and how we can engage in constructive dialogue and action to address the challenges facing our communities and our nation.
This deep dive has really gotten me thinking about the complexities of the political landscape and the importance of finding that balance between idealism and pragmatism.
It's a constant struggle, but one that's absolutely essential for any functioning democracy.
Well said. As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on something. Do you think this clash between AOC and Fetterman is a sign of things to come, or is it just a temporary flare-up?
That's a great question, and honestly, I don't think anyone can answer that definitively, but what I can say is that this episode highlights some very real tensions within the Democratic Party, tensions that are likely to persist and maybe even intensify as we get closer to that next election.
Right, and those tensions aren't just limited to the Democrats either.
No, they're not. We're seeing similar things play out within the Republican Party.
Exactly, so both parties are grappling with these internal divisions, trying to figure out how to appeal to their base while also attracting enough moderate voters to win those elections. It's a tough balancing act.
It really is.
And it's all happening against this backdrop of such intense social and cultural change, economic uncertainty, global instability, There's a lot at stake here, not just for the parties themselves, but for the future of American democracy.
No doubt about it. And, I think this clash between AOC and Fetterman, it offers a valuable lesson for all of us, regardless of our political affiliations. It's a reminder that politics isn't a game.
Right.
It's about real people, real lives, and real consequences.
It's also a reminder that we can't just sit on the sidelines and expect our leaders to figure it all out.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility to engage in these conversations, to challenge our own assumptions, and to demand better from those who represent us.
Couldn't agree more. We need to move beyond these simple narratives and this binary thinking that dominates so much of our political discourse and engage in a more nuanced and thoughtful way.
Because the future of our democracy depends on it. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. Does a focus on political purity and performance ultimately help or hurt the people that politicians claim to represent?
It's a question worth pondering, and it's a question that each of us needs to answer for ourselves as we navigate this complex and always changing political landscape.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring this topic, challenge your own assumptions, and form your own conclusions until next time.
So we've spent all this time really digging into this whole clash between AOC and Fetterman, and it feels like we've stumbled onto something much bigger than just a political disagreement,
Yeah, it's like we're looking at a miniature version of all the stuff that's shaping American politics right now.
Exactly. It's like you've got AOC representing this progressive, ideologically driven wing of the party, and then you've got Fetterman, at least in this case, taking this more pragmatic approach.
Right.
Let's get things done.
Right, and that RedState article we keep coming back to, they see this as a symptom of a much larger problem within the Democratic Party, this struggle to balance those competing forces.
Yeah. And their argument is that this focus on ideological purity tests and performative activism, it might actually backfire.
Right.
It could alienate moderate voters and actually make it harder for the party to govern effectively. And it's a critique that definitely resonates with some voters, especially those who are just tired of the partisan gridlock and the lack of progress on the issues that they actually care about.
Yeah, they just want to see something happen.
Exactly.
So it really begs the question, is this internal struggle within the Democratic Party, is it helping or hurting the very people they claim to represent?
That's the big question, isn't it? Are these ideological battles actually moving progressive goals forward, or are they just creating more division and gridlock?
And with a new election cycle coming up, that question becomes even more important.
Absolutely. The Democrats, they're going to have to find a way to bridge this divide if they want to maintain their majority and actually get their agenda passed. And they're going to have to do it in a political landscape that's becoming more and more polarized and fractured.
And let's not forget, this isn't just a Democratic problem.
Oh, of course not.
The Republicans are facing their own internal struggles, too.
Absolutely. Look at the rise of Trump and the Maggie's movement. It's created this huge rift between traditional conservatives and that more populist, nationalist wing of the party, right? Both parties are kind of wrestling with these internal divisions, trying to figure out how to keep their base happy while also attracting enough moderate voters to actually win elections.
It's a tough balancing act.
It really is. And it's all happening against a backdrop of such intense social and cultural change, economic uncertainty, global instability. There's a lot at stake here, and not just for the parties themselves, but for the future of American democracy.
It's kind of a make or break moment, it feels like.
It does. And you know what? I think this clash between AOC and Fetterman, it offers a really important lesson for all of us, no matter what our political affiliation is.
Oh, yeah.
It's a reminder that politics, this isn't a game.
Right.
We're talking about real people, real lives, real consequences.
And it's a reminder that we can't just sit back and expect our leaders to fix everything.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility to be part of these conversations, to challenge our own assumptions, and to demand better from the people who represent us.
I couldn't agree more. We need to move beyond these simplistic narratives and this binary thinking that just dominates so much of our political discourse and try to engage with each other in a more nuanced and thoughtful way.
Because at the end of the day, the future of our democracy really depends on it.
I think so.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. Does a focus on political purity and performance, does it actually help or hurt the people that politicians claim to represent?
It's a question that's definitely worth thinking about, and it's a question that each of us needs to answer for ourselves as we try to make sense of this really complex and constantly changing political world.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We encourage you to keep exploring this topic. Challenge your own assumptions and form your own conclusions. Until next time.
In the heart of this nation, under skies so blue, there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true. From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty